Hello everybody, my name's Nicola Huckabee and I provide operations and comms support to the Cooperative Council's Innovation Network. The Co-op College is providing the technical know-how for this session today, so we thought if we thank them in advance, everything should run smoothly. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Steve Reid, OBE MP, Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government and Honorary President of the Cooperative Council's Innovation Network. We know that it's a very busy time for everyone working in local government at the moment, and we're delighted that Steve is able to chair this session today. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and welcome everybody to the session. I hope everyone can see the slides. I can't weirdly on my screen, but I'm on an iPad because my laptop broke, so hopefully that's only me. Anyway, welcome to the session. And we're talking today about the Co-op Council Network's latest publication, which is called Cooperation Through COVID. But before telling you more about the network itself, I'm going to introduce the panel. So we've got Councillor Louise Gittins, who is the leader of Cheshire West and Chester Council. We've got Councillor Sharon Taylor, who is the leader of Stevenage Borough Council. And we've got Councillor Peter Curling, who is the leader of the Hillingdon Labour and Cooperative group on the council in the London Borough of Hillingdon. So there we are. Now, the Co-op Councils Network, I'm sure many people that have signed up for this already know this, but for anyone that doesn't, the Co-op Councils Network is exploring how we can use cooperative values to improve services for local people, improve outcomes in what we deliver for people who use our public services, improve value for money, but also rebuild trust, which is very broken in much of British politics at the moment. And all of that we aim to do by a simple approach of trying to do things with communities and public service users instead of doing things to communities and public service users. And often that means models of co-production, collaboration, more participative and open forms of taking public decisions so that people feel that they themselves have a bigger say over the outcomes themselves. And we believe those fundamental cooperative values can improve the way that councils operate, but also show a way forward for the Labour Party as we work towards the manifesto on which we'll fight the next general election. And for my money, I think there's an awful lot that we can learn from our cooperative councils about how we can do things differently and rebuild trust in politics, not just locally, but nationally as well. And that will be an imperative if we're going to climb the electoral mountain that's ahead of us to win that coming general election. Now, we started the network in 2012. It was founded by me. At the time, I was the leader of Lambeth Council. Jim McMahon, who's now the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport, but was at the time the leader of Oldham Council, and Sharon Taylor, who is the leader of Stevenage Council. We just had a small number of councils initially. That's now grown to almost 100 councils and other organisations right across the country that are all participating in the network as a kind of live action learning set. So piloting different approaches in services in different contexts and then learning from each other to see how we can improve politics and public service provision more generally. So that's, you should be seeing, I hope, on your screens, some of the logos and insignia of the different councils and organisations that are members of the network today, and we're delighted to have all of them. I believe it's the single biggest movement now in Labour local government, which is quite an achievement. Now, the pandemic has totally changed the way our world has been operating over the last year. One thing that it's done is it's really shone a light on the deep inequalities that scar our country. We've seen that through the disproportionate impact of the virus on BAME communities, on poorer communities in particular. All of these inequalities already existed, but the pandemic has really exposed just how deep and damaging those forms of inequality are in the way that it's affected different communities in disproportionate ways. The second thing the pandemic has really shone a light on is the failure of our over-centralised state. The government got it wrong repeatedly all the way through this pandemic. In particular, they got it wrong on PPE distribution, they got it wrong on testing, they got it wrong on contact tracing, they got it wrong on shielding, and they were too slow into lockdowns, and then too confusing with their messaging and the tiered systems. All of that is because the government attempted to control all decision making from the centre and refused to engage with the expertise and insights on the front line that could have helped them to become more successful at every single stage all the way through the pandemic. And it is those failures of over-centralisation on the part of the government that have resulted in our country now having the worst death rate in the world from COVID-19, but also the deepest recession of any major economy. None of that was inevitable. It happened because our government is not just incompetent, but they tried to control everything from the centre instead of opening up decision-making to experts on the front line who knew far better. And for me, it really does show how if we want to tackle inequality, if we want to tackle the failures of over-centralisation, we have to open up power, not just through radical models of devolution and localisation, but also through direct empowerment to citizens in the decisions that affect them in their everyday lives, because you get better decisions that way. Now, the publication that the Co-op Councillors Network is launching today, Cooperation Through COVID, there it is. I can see it on my screen as well, which is marvellous. You can also see the link there if you want to download a copy for yourselves. It's well worth reading. We're going to talk about this publication and how different councils have used those cooperative values to deliver a stronger response for their communities. The publication is divided into 3 sections: response, recovery, and resilience. And I think we're going to be talking through each of those approaches through our different panelists who have assembled this morning to initially speak to you for 10 minutes each, and then there's a slot at the end of around 20 minutes for questions. So I'm going to go straight onto the panel, and it's a pleasure to welcome, first of all, Councillor Louise Gittins, the leader of Cheshire West and Chester.
Thanks very much, Steve, and thank you for coming here today to listen to our experience in Cheshire West and Chester. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Okay, so I thought I'd give a bit of background because nobody knows where Cheshire West and Chester is, and they think perhaps it's a Tory council, but actually it's a Labour controlled council, and it's a cooperative council as well, and something that we're really proud of. So that gives you a glimpse of where Cheshire West is. On to the west of us is Wales, to the north Liverpool City region, and to the south of it and east we've got Shropshire, Cheshire East and Warrington. So we're a really diverse county. We've got an ancient Roman city of Chester. We've got market towns that have got really strong identities, and about a third of our borough is rural with significant agricultural land. But having said that, we've got a really strong industrial base. We've got Vauxhall Car Factory, CF Fertilisers, the Stanlow Oil Refinery, and a really strong retail sector. We are, however, one of the most polluting boroughs in the country as well. I think we're 4th. The quality of life is generally good with good incomes and health, but we do have areas of significant disadvantage. Recently, we declared a poverty emergency. If anyone's interested, please get in touch. And in 2019, we declared the climate emergency as well. But I want to talk to you today about our amazing community response during the pandemic and how we've supported both our communities and our public sector partners and businesses to work together to try and make the best we can out of this awful situation. Next slide, please. So first of all, volunteering. We recognised in March, as soon as we went into lockdown, there were things that we couldn't do on our own, and we had to reach out and appeal to the public to help and support. So we set up our coordinated COVID community response, and we did a call out for people to register. We actually started doing this just before the NHS did their call out for people. So we managed to get over 2,000 local people who stepped up formally through our website, through our online system, to get involved with the community response. Alongside that, we had mutual aid groups popping up, and we had good neighbours who were just wanted to get involved to support their neighbours. So we work very closely with Cheshire West Voluntary Action. So we, working with Cheshire West Voluntary Action, we brokered over 1,000 of these volunteers to actually go and work with different voluntary and community groups right across the borough. So this was the first sort of step, getting those people involved. The ones that we couldn't broker action with community and voluntary groups actually started that good neighbour and joined into other mutual aid groups. Next slide, please. We recognise that community and voluntary groups, they never have enough money, so we set up a community response fund. We initially put £250,000 in, and then local charity, the Westminster Foundation, matched that with a further 250,000. And grants, we made a commitment that we'd get the money out as soon as we could do. There was an online bidding process, and we ensured that grants were paid within 3 days of people applying. And we sort of set out criteria of the types of things that we were looking for. So food support, older people's support, support for children and young people, domestic abuse, ideas around health and well-being, befriending, transport. So all those organisations were encouraged to bid for the money, and we successfully got it out, and that pot is now empty. It was totally spent. So all of our community groups were going out doing their own thing. They were coordinated. We kept in regular touch with them. And then actually we thought, well, actually the council, what's the council going to do as part of their response? So if you can go on to the next slide. So we realised that we needed to set up a food hub, and I'm sure everybody's done that. You know, this is what local governments are really good at doing, acting quickly and getting on and doing things. So we have a contact centre that is run by one of our council companies called Quest, and they were put into action to support the shielded residents, but also there is a helpline for anybody who might find themselves in a difficult situation. At the same time, we set up a food distribution hub, which was in one of our leisure centres. And very quickly, staff volunteered. There's pictures here of some of our democratic services teams who volunteered to go there and help set up the food parcels. If you remember at the time, the government had organised this delivery by supermarkets, and it didn't really happen very well. So we got involved and we set up our own food hub. So with Quest, our council company, we made about 9,000 outbound calls for shielded residents, and then we had about 4,000 incoming calls from people who needed help and support. And over that sort of initial first stages of lockdown, we delivered well over 1,000 food parcels. But at the same time, our amazing councillors in the Labour group went into their communities and set up new food banks, new food hubs, and worked together with their local organisations to make sure that there was a network of food distribution hubs across the borough, linking in with the mutual aid groups that were sitting in. Our fire service got involved. So if we couldn't get in touch with some of the shielded people, they would go out and knock on their door and make sure that they had the support that they had. So it was a real sort of public sector response running alongside that community response. Next slide, please. So we recognised that our focus needed to be on making sure that shielded people and those finding themselves in difficult circumstances were supported through our call centre. So our IT bod set up this bot, artificial intelligence. She's called Ada. I presume it's a she, I'm not really sure. So Ada is there to support people rather than having to phone up a contact centre. And actually during that first lockdown, we saw the increase of people accessing the council digitally rise to about 61%, which was prior to that about 35%. So this our artificial intelligence was also put in place to support that whole response. And it's great to see that people are moving towards that digital, but we realise there's a long way to go because there's quite a lot of people that are digitally excluded. So next slide, please. So in about May, when things were, coming out of lockdown was in sight, we thought, well, actually, how are we going to celebrate these amazing stories, these fantastic things that our communities have been doing? So we set up a website called Inspire Cheshire West. And this was a safe space where residents and community groups could actually come in and post stories, photographs of all the amazing things that were going on. So we saw stories of kids making cakes and taking them around to their neighbours, and all those fantastic, very locally based community actions that were taking place. They could share photographs of, remember all those rainbows that used to be seen everywhere on, people would put posters in the windows and on lampposts and stuff like that. So it's still there, it's still ongoing. We've had floods recently, and the community came together again to support during the floods. So we're hoping that we'll get some stories of how that's happened there. But it's fantastic. If you've got if you want some heartwarming stories, go on our website and have a look at Inspire Cheshire West. Next slide, page, please. So we realised there was a real thirst for information. So we wanted to have data that was publicly available in a dashboard. So people wanted to know how many people in our ward have got COVID-19. So running alongside this is a ward level data in terms of COVID, but there was also information about, sadly, the number of people that have died. It goes on to include things like people that were claiming benefits, number of people on furlough, footfall in our town centres as they opened up again. There's also information, we do Google tracking, so we can actually see where people are using parks and things like that. So some really open-facing data that the public can then go to see what's happening in their borough and then go down towards level. Yes, I will wrap up. So very quickly, just the next slide, please. We have an outbreak management board, which is webcast to talk about COVID. Next slide. And the final part of our community response is community champions. These were set up in September, and it's a network of people that go out and support residents in the borough with messages from the council. And the final slide is partnership, and this couldn't have happened without that partnership and that cooperation of all those different organisations and our amazing public. So that is a snapshot of our response in Cheshire West. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. That was a fascinating presentation. I was particularly impressed by the work you've done through digitisation and the bot you had there. That looks like a real, I mean, some of the councils that have really innovated have really pushed their residents online. And I think that was an amazing way to do it, the way you described it. But also the community champions, because presumably that's a resource that will be available after the pandemic as well. And it's been really inspiring to see how councils have developed a community-led front end for some of this service through the crisis that I think will stand them in great stead in the future as well. Right, let's move over now to Sharon Taylor. Sharon Taylor, of course, is the leader of Stevenage Borough Council, but she's also the chair of the Cooperative Councils Network and one of the original founders of the network. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Steve. And if I can have my first slide up, that would be lovely. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see them on the screen, but let's hope so. That's great. Thank you very much, Chloe. So I'm really proud of the network, Steve, and where it's gone to, and the innovation and ideas that it's generating, both through all the key issues that the country is facing at the moment. But this latest pandemic that we've gone through it's been very clear to see that the COVID work being done in local government is exemplary. And I would be as bold as to say that I think local governments actually led the way through this pandemic. All of the issues that you raised about things that were just not done well centrally, local governments picked those up and supported our communities in a way that's been absolutely incredible. And what we were focusing on in Stevenage now is how we take that kind of energy, that community spirit through into the recovery phase that we will need to go into in the coming months. If I can have the next slide, Chloe, please. Thank you. So what we've seen, and Louise very in a detailed way articulated this, was the public, private, voluntary sectors all working together to respond to the pandemic. You see there the logo of our Stevenage Helps function, which we quickly, the day after the lockdown was announced, got together with Stevenage Community Trust and set this up. So we did a massive amount of fundraising to raise funds for our community, but also to support those who were shielding, those who were in the Sustain programme, because it was quite clear that the government programme to support those individuals just wasn't working. And we've gone on using that Stevenage Helps to support free school meals, to support our older residents, and now to do the support we need for the vaccination programme. It's been a real regeneration, revival of the community in our town. And what we need to do now is the cooperating to rebuild the economy. And that's what we've been putting our minds to. Next slide, please. So we are in uncharted territory here. Steve's already said this will be the worst recession we've faced. But when I was doing some research for a housing meeting I attended yesterday, I was reminded that in the 3 decades after the Second World War, 4.4 million homes were built in the UK. That's over 130,000 a year. 60,000 of those were in Britain's first new town, which is my hometown, which is Stevenage. And with the whole town being built in just over 20 years, now, of course, 70 years on from then, we have a massive renewal job on our hands. And I've been keen to use this to bring the principles of community wealth building into the regeneration programme, to start tackling the inequalities that we face between my borough and the rest of Hertfordshire, the inequalities of economy, of health, of education, and so on. So this is a different type of recession that needs new responses. And what we've shown in the pandemic is a further light on this, as there is kind of a unified wish to learn the lessons as we emerge into the recovery phase, to build back better, to build back greener, in a more equal, socially just way, and with a focus on the communities that have really come to the fore in the last 12 months, and a focus on localism. And I think, you know, I can't stress that enough, and I'm sure that the Labour frontbench team will be looking at this as we start to prepare ourselves for running the country in 2024, that focus on localism is going to be really key going forward. They're our cooperative values, and I think it's time for the next cooperative revolution. So a different type of recession, we need to make the most of national programmes but not rely on them, and a greater need for partnership and cooperative working. Next slide please, Chloe. So we passed a motion in council in support of community wealth building. I'd always been interested in this and what had been done in Preston and in other parts of the world on community wealth building. But we wanted to develop our own version of that for Stevenage. And we wanted to incorporate it in the rollout of our cooperative neighbourhoods programme. We now have 6 neighbourhoods identified in Stevenage with their own cooperative teams of support teams, both of council staff and partnership working teams, to engage with our residents in those neighbourhoods. The engagement part of that is a little tricky at the moment, but we're working on the digital methods of engaging. And we've got a £1 billion town centre programme. So making sure that our town centre and the way that that £1 billion programme moves forward is supporting our residents. They're engaged in how we design it, and they're also benefiting from the economic activity that will generate. So next slide please, Chloe. So we set about drawing up a charter to make sure that economic growth works for everyone, working together to change things, not just talking about the change you want to see, but actually making it happen. And you need a clear focus and ambition to do that. So next slide please. The Charter is rooted in community wealth building, and not only have we passed that motion at Stevenage, but we've built it into, I'm lucky enough to be a local enterprise board member, so that's gone into the local industrial strategy in Hertfordshire, and it's also gone into the work of the Hertfordshire Growth Board. I chair that. The county is split into two sections for that purpose, and I chair one side of the county's growth board, and we have community wealth building as a fundamental principle of that. So holding and reinvesting more money locally is absolutely key, and you'll see our 4 themes there. Looking at procurement and social value, how we get those, how we measure them, training and skills, growing the cooperative and social economy sector, and other councils in the network have done some fantastic work on what the barriers to cooperative economies are, and of course effectively tackling climate change, because if we don't do that, we're all sunk, aren't we? So they were the principles, and we've been looking at those key themes in terms of how they support us through the recovery. Next slide, please. So we have a very clear ambition. We want to see a fairer society that better connects the people, in my case in Stevenage, but wherever they are, to the economy. Too often we see, even in wealthy places like Hertfordshire, we see people that are very well supported by the economy and people who are really struggling. And we need to make that more resilient as we cooperate for the kind of sustainable growth we all want to see. And I think you've got to really think about that as we go forward, because the cooperative way of doing things needs a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm to make it work. And you need to build in the foundation stones right from the start. If you don't, then the ever-present needs of capitalism will just take all of the profits out of what you're doing, and your local community won't benefit as much as it could do. So next slide, please. So responding to the recession, a step change to meet the challenges we're all facing, and making sure that the growth does really get embedded in our communities. And our communities and businesses with a shared interest to grow together. And that's working really well through the charter that we've put in place. And connecting, next slide please, connecting people to growth. We have a very high-tech economy in Stevenage. We've got high-tech science, technology, pharma, but many of the people in Stevenage don't go into the jobs in those businesses. So we need to work through all of the avenues we can to provide careers advice, mentor people who want to be self-employed, make sure we support our employers to become disability confident, and make sure that people are shopping locally or volunteering with a community group. Next slide, please. And then embedding that growth in our community. So making sure that we do all of the things you can see on that slide, investing in our charities, pooling budgets, involving people in delivery, supporting cooperatives to start up and grow. And we've worked with our we've got a startup agency in Stevenage that runs its own centre. We're working with them so that they are clear that they can put the cooperative option to new businesses before they start up. And here's just one example, next slide please, of connecting to the community, our Stevenage Works project, creating a construction hub to help with the jobs that we'll need in Stevenage as we go through the regeneration programme, and improving local people's skills, including those who were on the long-term unemployed register. Next slide, please. And then making sure that we create accessible volunteer and job opportunities, working with our partners. We have an economy task force, which my colleague Lloyd Briscoe set up. So bringing all the partners around the table to make sure that we're creating that cooperative growth that we all want to see. Next slide, this is my last one. So what we did, we got everybody in a room together, businesses, community organisations, local public sector partners, and we asked them to pledge to support our charter, 100 pledges of support for the charter in 100 days. And that was massively successful. It got a huge amount of interest from our local employers. And now we're working through our town development board. We've put a £50 million bid into government for town development fund. The projects in there are all designed to meet the needs of this community wealth building strategy. So we hope that we will have this recovery built on cooperative principles. That's what we all want to see. We want as we go through the process of recovery and renewal, that benefits everybody in our community and builds on the amazing community spirit that's been generated through the pandemic. We need that recovery, we need that cooperative element to it. So I hope that's been of interest to everybody, and thank you very much for listening.
Sharon, thank you so much. If we were in a normal meeting room rather than on screen, you'd be getting a thunderous round of applause now. There's some really, really exciting work going on in Stevenage. I was really interested in what you're saying about cooperative neighbourhoods and how we can use the different kind of recession, how we focus on this different kind of recession to build a more inclusive and sustainable recovery. There's an awful lot in that. So to people who are joining to listen to our panelists, please, you must have questions in your head from how much you're hearing here. Please put them in the chat and we'll call you after we've heard our third speaker to ask them to our panel, because there's an awful lot more to get out of the people we've got speaking on the panel this afternoon. I think we're the afternoon. Oh, it's still the morning by 10 minutes. Right, we'll move now to Councillor Peter Curling, who is the leader of Hillingdon Labour and Cooperative Group. And while the other two speakers are council leaders, Peter is the leader of the opposition. Hopefully will be a council leader in the future. But over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so just a little bit of background first to sort of paint the picture of where we are and the situation we're in. Hillingdon is the westernmost London borough. In many ways has more in common with Berkshire and Buckinghamshire than it does with Camden or Lambeth, but we are pretty split as far as political polarisation is concerned, with very strong Conservative areas in the north of the borough, very strong Labour in the south of the borough, and the constituencies, the parliamentary constituencies, Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner, which has a Conservative MP who used to be the leader of the deputy leader of the council, David Simmons. The central part of our borough is Uxbridge and South Ruislip, which of course is Boris Johnson's constituency, and the southern part of the borough is Hayes and Harlington, which is John McDonnell's constituency. So it's quite a split as far as politics is concerned, quite a polarised borough. On the council, 2/3 of the council seats are Tory, and a third are the Labour group. And the Tories consider the word cooperative to be quite a dirty word, and they use it as an insult rather than anything else. It's an insult that I wear quite proudly as a badge of honour, because they accuse me of wanting to turn the council into a cooperative, and that's exactly right, I do. The Tory leader up until a month ago was Sir Ray Puddifoot MBE, who had been in place for 20 years and run the council rather tightly. Some would say pretty much a dictatorship, but he'd been in place and stuck in his ways for many years. They do really silly things on the council, like vote down Labour motions just because they've come from Labour councillors and for no other reason. So I didn't expect to have any cross-party working going on at all with the pandemic, but actually what happened when the lockdown occurred was that the community naturally pulled together, and they pulled together in a very cooperative way. I think the one positive that could come out of the pandemic is that everybody, no matter who they are, worked in a very cooperative way throughout the pandemic, throughout the first lockdown at any rate. So we had lots of volunteers coming forward, lots of well-meaning people wanting to help out the vulnerable and the people that were isolating, and we were inundated with people who wanted to do something to help out in the local community. I was also aware that there was lots of scammers about as well, who saw this as a good opportunity to target some of their victims and scam people. So as well as good, well-meaning people coming forward, there was also lots of not so well-meaning people coming forward to exploit the situation. I had a call with the leader of the council, which was quite unusual, because normally he only calls me when there's something that he wants to moan about one of our councillors, or something he wants to try and dissuade us from doing. But I had a call from the leader of the council, Ray Puddifoot, to discuss what was going on. And he too had come to the conclusion that there was lots of scammers around, as well as well-meaning people, and did the council really have the capacity to cope with all of these volunteers, make sure that they were genuine, and to get them into the right places to help the right people. So he informed me that the council were forming a partnership, and if I could have the next slide, please, Chloe. And this partnership that the council was arranging was with a local umbrella organisation for a number of local charities called Hillingdon for All, or H for All, to coordinate those volunteers, so that there was some control over having genuine volunteers, and also targeting them to the genuinely vulnerable people and the people that are isolating. Hillingdon for All is a charitable incorporated organisation, and the 5 third sector charities that fall under the umbrella of H for All are Age, UK, Hillingdon, Harrow and Brent, DASH, which is the Disablement Association of Hillingdon, Hillingdon Carers, Hillingdon Hospice and Hillingdon Mind. So H for All set up a food parcel service for the shielding and the vulnerable. All the volunteers that came forward to us as local councillors offering their services as volunteers, we could then direct them to H for All, and they were put into action, helping out where they could. A lot of our councillors from both parties, I have to say, volunteered and helped out as well. And also other charities helped out. I'm a trustee on the Fastenage Memorial Trust. We have a couple of large community halls, and they were used for food storage and stuff like that. So it was a good, the council and the community and the charities within the community all helping out, all cooperating, all working tremendously together. As the lockdown continued, so did the phone calls that I had with the leader of the council. He kept me up to date with case numbers, communications around what the council were doing. They created their own community hub, so we had input with the creation of that. The phone calls became not only weekly but daily on some occasions, with updates and asking my opinion on various staff redeployments, the siting of a large temporary mortuary in the borough, the government use of local hotels, lots and lots of organisational things that were discussed, and you know, we had some input into some of the decisions being made around those sort of things. Also, how do we operate as a council? How does the democratic process continue? How does the council AGM operate? All of those things we discussed, and we came up with mutual agreement on how to run virtual council meetings, how the process of democracy would continue, even though it was very early days of having online meetings, and there was no chance of having any meetings in person. We also discussed things like road repairs and the priority given to them. The leader of the council knew the Tory areas really well, but not so much about the Labour areas. So he was asking my opinion on the priorities of various road repairs within the Labour areas of the council. Also, domestic abuse, that was quite another hot topic. The council appointed a Labour councillor, Councillor Janet Gardner, as the domestic abuse victims advocate, and some of the cases she was dealing with were extremely concerning. I had an insight into just some of the cases that Janet was dealing with, and I mean, domestic abuse really went off the scale during that first lockdown. The leader of the council was very good in that he would intervene in some of these cases to make sure that the council services were delivering what they should for domestic abuse victims, and that was really good cross-party working. As the restrictions were easing, I also had regular calls on the lockdown of the easing and where restrictions were being relaxed. We had quite a detailed and in some cases heated discussion over Ruislip Lido, and Ruislip Lido is a man-made beach in the middle of the borough in Ruislip. And we had incidents where crowds were gathering. There was no social distancing. There was lots of concern from the public. We had a bit of a difference of opinion because the leader of the council wanted it to remain open. And I took the view that it should either close, or if it was to remain open, there should be sufficient safeguards in place and guards on duty to make sure that social distancing happened and everything was as COVID secure as it could have been back then. We also had discussions around how staff would return to normal duties with provision for home working, and the possibility of maybe introducing some socially distanced council meetings. The Labour group was adamant that meetings should continue online rather than in person until it was safe to do so. We did get quite a few significant achievements through our cross-party working. One in particular that I think was quite outstanding was we had a local Love for Scrubs group that was set up by a local businesswoman who runs a tailoring shop, and she was while she couldn't trade, she was producing scrubs for the local NHS, raising money to do so. She came. Oh, brilliant! Okay, she came to us for funding. And through discussions with the leader of the council, we managed to get her £11,000 funding. The democratic process of the council ran very smoothly. The whole council and the whole community worked together. And in wrapping up, I would say that it proved that you can have constructive opposition, but also work together. And the public could see that they had one council working together with them, supporting the residents and also supporting the staff of the council. And I shall leave it there as I've just run over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much. It's important to hear what Labour groups in opposition are doing as well, because of course we have many members in the network who are in opposition as well as groups that are in control. But we've got just under 15 minutes left now for questions. So I'm going to call, I'm not going to ask every panellist to answer every question because then we might be able to get through everybody. But Pauline Bacon, you've got a very interesting question on social value there. If I could call Pauline Bacon to ask a question, please.
Right.
I'm going to ask Louise to answer this one.
Hello, hi. Yeah, I've just I work for Suffolk County Council, but I'm also the Colchester newly appointed liaison with Colchester Borough Council as well. So I've got links across to, and I'm also a local community councillor. So I've got links to lots of different things. And the actual thing about social value is something I've sort of come across quite recently. Now, obviously, something like Suffolk County Council has a massive budget, and so do the others in a certain amount. I mean, even our community council has a budget of almost £250,000, which is big for a community council. And I'm trying to get to see how I can get all of our councillors and all the procurement teams to work more towards social value. And I'd really like some help and some ideas how to do that, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pauline. I think Louise, would you like to answer that one? How do you use social value through procurement?
Yeah, so I think social value is really important, and it needs to be at the heart of a Labour council, really. So I'm sure there's examples from Labour councils that you can actually use yourself to take forward, but you need to think about what it is that you want. Do you want things like a local living wage? So that's really important. Do you want things like access to training and skills? So it's almost coming up with a list of what you want and then saying, right, okay, as part of our commissioning, this is what we would expect people that we commission with to actually do. I mean, I've just heard an example of council next to ours who said to a very large employer, well, it was Peel Holdings actually, if you want a contract with us, this is what you need to do, and they agreed to it. So I think you need to be bold, you need to think about your values and what you would want to see from an employer and just go for it. Now, if you're in opposition, that's a bit harder, so you need to come up with cunning plans and ways of convincing people that that's the right way to go. So hopefully that would be a help, but speak to any of the other cooperative councils to see what they're doing.
Steve, can I just come in on that particular issue? One of the things we're doing with our charter is to put a statement every year in our statement of accounts. I'm not quite sure how Ernst & Young are going to respond to this, but that's their problem, not mine. But we are going to be putting in as part of our proper accounting, financial accounting process, we will be putting a statement of the social value we've achieved in our statement of accounts every year. It's not, measuring social value has been notoriously difficult over the years, but if we don't start somewhere, we're never going to be able to do it. And we felt that was really important to us to be actually demonstrating that accounting is not just about pounds, shillings and pence, it's about, or pounds and pence these days, it's about actually demonstrating what you're doing in the community as well. So, you know, the Stevenage Works programme for all our housing contractors and so on and so on.
Thanks, Sharon. Right, next question is from Mel Dawkins, and I think this is a good one for you to pick up, Sharon, as well. But let's hear from Mel. Mel, you're a councillor, I think, as well.
Yeah. Oh, hello. Yeah, I haven't got my video things on, sorry. Yeah, well, it's kind of self-explanatory. Yeah, I'm quite a new councillor, actually, so full of the joys of spring so far. But yeah, so we have a Tory-led council, and it'd be great to sort of embed more cooperative ideas. And it's just any tip, I mean, obviously it's going to be hard working against them, but it'd be good to get something. We're doing the local plan at the moment, so it'd be great to try and get some of cooperative community wealth building strategies embedded into the local plan, and any tips really on how to do that when you're up against the Tory-led council.
Right, Sharon, that sounds like one for you, community wealth building.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, my first thing to say is don't forget, Mel, that opposition groups can join our network, and you'd be very welcome to do that, and you can benefit from all of the things that are being done by groups like Peter's, who are in opposition. And we were delighted last year to see one of our councillors that joined as an opposition group, the North Herts Labour group, actually win their council last year, and some of the cooperative ideas that they'd generated from us, I'm sure, I would say this, wouldn't I, but I'm sure helped with that win to win the council in North Herts for the first time in 20 odd years. So fantastic news for them. So join the network, you'll get lots of ideas there. Although we have a big majority at Stevenage, I'm also a member of Hertfordshire County Council, so I do see it from the other side as well, because we've got a Labour group of 10, or 9 now, sorry, 9 at Hertfordshire County Council, and there's 77 councillors. So I do see the other side of this. And what's important there is using whatever you can to influence it. If you can do it through scrutiny, if you can do it when you put your alternative budget amendments, just get those ideas in there for more cooperative ways of doing things. And we've been fairly successful in Hertfordshire, and as I said, persuading Hertfordshire council leaders across the board in Hertfordshire to have community wealth building as one of the key strands of the Hertfordshire Growth Board work was a real achievement, because we've got 5 Conservative councils in Hertfordshire, 3 Liberal Democrat and the 2 Labour councils. So, you know, the ideas they work for recovery, they work for coming out of the recession, and I think we just have to keep shouting about them, because they make a lot of sense to whoever you're talking to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mel, for your question, and we're glad to hear you're enjoying being a councillor even in these very difficult times. Right, Sean Fielding, the leader of Oldham Council, has got the next question, and I think that yours will be the last question, Sean, so I'm going to ask everyone to come in very briefly in response to your question. Sean.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Really enjoyed listening to the work of other councils. There's a lot that we can relate to in Oldham in terms of the way that the community stepped up and how we've harnessed that. And there was 2 points to my question in the chat, but I'll just ask the first one because I think it'd be the most useful to hear the panel's view about. And it's, I did some volunteering at our food bank during the pandemic relief effort. And it was, you know, it was good to get out there, good to get out of the house, really, because otherwise I would have just been sat at home talking into webcams like this all day, every week. But I came across lots of people that traditionally did not get involved in community or voluntary work that were getting involved this time round. People that either found themselves had a bit more spare time because they were on furlough or whatever, but actually people that were still working, but we wanted to use their spare time towards this. And something that would be really useful in terms of responding to the, recovering from the pandemic, is how do we ensure that at least a proportion of that capacity that's come forward because of the crisis can be retained and used in the future, so that people don't simply go back to work and go back to using the free time in less constructive ways, if that's a good way of putting it, and we keep that energy and enthusiasm beyond the pandemic, because it will make a huge difference, particularly in parts of the country where we don't have a huge public sector because of the cuts, and we don't have that huge amount of community resilience because of poverty. It would make a huge difference if we could retain some of that, and I'd just like to know the panel's thoughts on how you might do that.
That's a great question. Thank you so much, Sean. Right, these will be your last responses to the last question. So you're only going to get a minute, I'm afraid. So if there's any final point you wanted to make, and I'm going to bring you in reverse order to how we started the session. So Peter first, please. Just 1 minute, please. Okay.
I mean, that question from Oldham is, yeah, I mean, I don't know where you would begin with that, because I think once people do start going back to their normal lives, they'll be so busy. I suppose really it's down to community engagement and continuing that community engagement, yeah, just going that one stage further to ensure that we don't lose that engagement. Otherwise, I fear people will just go back to their normal lives and it'll be quickly forgotten, unfortunately.
Thanks, Peter. Sharon.
That goes right to the heart of cooperation, that question. And thank you, Sean, for all the inspiring work you do in Oldham. It was seeing some of the stuff you did up there that got me engaged in this network in the first place. I think I'd just give two elements to my answer to that. The first thing is the cooperative neighbourhoods, you know, going out into those neighbourhoods, creating a team, a partnership team that is got the council supporting, but also other partners and the residents all engaged in how we make those neighbourhoods better. And that can be everything from the mutual aid groups we've seen flourishing to people like our green space volunteers who go out and keep the green areas so wonderful as they do, but also, you know, the council using its power of convening things to do things like our social inclusion partnership. So get the charitable and voluntary sector organisations round the table, see what the challenges are for them, see what the blockages are. Finance is always a challenge, of course, for any organisation, but doing whatever we can to help and support to strengthen the way that those organisations are supported through the statutory bodies that are there to help them. So doing whatever we can in that regard is great. But I think also encouraging people to carry on, you know, just where we get involved ourselves. And like you, Sean, I was involved in a food bank for many, many years. And seeing the strength of feeling there, that's just, it's a very wonderful thing, that initiative, that we see people who want to come forward to help their fellow citizens. We need to build on that and encourage it.
Thank you, Sharon. Right, Louise, you've got a minute, please.
Okay, without repeating anything, so we've got our Community Champions Network now. We meet once a month with them, and it's a very sort of free-for-all where they tell us what they think and then they go out with our messages. So I think that's one part of it. But we've really strengthened our relationship with the community and voluntary sector. It was a bit paternalistic before, and now we're very much equals. So it's how we can work and support them. So we're getting involved with Space Hive now and setting up to support them in crowdfunding initiatives so that they can grow and develop their things. So it's something that will move forward, but we need to hang on to it because it's special. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful, and it's what's kept us going, I think. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you so much, Louise. Thank you, everybody who's been to listen to our panelists today. And can we have a virtual round of applause for all three of them? I think there have been some really, really outstanding, thought-provoking contributions. And this is a conversation that will keep going. None of us want to go back to how the world was before. We can move forwards and make a reality of building back better. For the government, it's just a slogan. For our cooperative councils in particular, it's reality. And this is a conversation I hope everyone on this call will stay involved with as we move forwards into that better future. And there's a copy of the publication on your screens now. Please download it, stay in touch with the Co-op Councils Network, and thank you again, particularly to our panelists for coming here today.